At 7 o'clock, I will call to order the May 9th work session, the Olentangy Schools Board of Education. Mr. Johnson, please call the roll.
Ms. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Fiesel?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. White? Here. Mr. O'Brien?
Still here. Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Discussion. Seeing none.
Ms. Dunbar?
Yes.
Ms. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes. So again, this is a work session, so there'll be no voting. There'll be just discussion of issues relative to the board. And the first item is the first reading of the May 2003 5-year financial forecast, as well as the first reading of the fiscal 2014 general fund budget. And Mr. Johnson will take us through that discussion.
Okay. Good evening. First we'll talk about the fiscal year 14 general fund budget. I'm going to talk a little bit first about the budget process. We used the process pretty similar to last year. In talking with the Finance Committee over the last couple of years, they do like our process that we're using, so we didn't make a lot of significant changes this year. As usual, the process began around January of 2013 when we send out our budget spreadsheets to the building principals and department heads. In March, they turned those completed budget spreadsheets into a central office. We have a central office budget committee that reviews those budgets. Sitting on the central office budget committee is myself, Linda Martin, business manager, technology director, Mark Rafe, Jack Fetty. Sorry if I left anybody off. I think that's everyone. After the budget committee's been, the central office budget committee's been through the budgets, that we then set up a meeting with the budget subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the audit and finance committee, made up of David Black and Tracy McDowell. They reviewed these budgets in April, excluding payroll and benefits. Those budgets aren't ready by then for the review, so we look at those in the finance committee meeting. After their approval that the budgets look reasonable, I include the fiscal year 14 budget in the May forecast. So those do match. Just looking at some of the nuts and bolts of the budget. At the building level, we use a per pupil spending amount. We use the same per pupil rate that we used last year. If you remember, the last several years we'd had significant decreases in that per pupil amount. There you see the rates per grade level there. At the department budget level, we use what we call a zero-based budgeting. They're not given a target budget, but with each, they have to give a rationale for each line item that they're budgeting for. Payroll and benefits portion of the budget, we work closely with human resources, putting in the most recent staffing projections, looking at the most recent new hire contracts, taking into account the retirements that we know are coming, and the replacements that we know at the time. That's one of the areas where there's still a lot of significant changes that can and will happen, because human resources is constantly looking at enrollment and how that shakes out between the buildings. There's still hiring going on, so We try to get as close as we can, but there is going to be room for potential changes there. We pulled out variances that are greater than $100,000 and 20%, comparing the fiscal year 14 budget to the fiscal year 13 budget. There were 7 lines. The first one there is 119, other certified salary. You'll notice a decrease of $182,000. That's really a change in how we're doing things with intervention. Currently, this year and in previous years, we've hired teachers that do that work, additional work after school for additional pay. Now they've gone to a method where they'll now be hiring subs out of the ESC sub-hiring pool. 2 benefits. One, at a cheaper rate, obviously, so there's a little bit of a savings in salary, but also it gives them the flexibility of providing that intervention during the day as opposed to having to wait till after school with the teaching staff. Second salary item there is certified severance, line 132. There's an increase there of $167,000. The variance in severance is related to the changes in the STRS retirement regulations, which has led to a significant increase in the number of retirees. I'll mention that when we talk about the forecast, but that number is going to trend up for fiscal 13, which it has, as well as fiscal year 14, and again in fiscal year 15 when those changes finally take effect, or I guess when they'll take effect to where people will have retired by then to avoid their retirement being harmed. And while this shows up in line 132 as an increase, at the same time this actually leads to a decrease in expenditures, because as the severance increases, that means more people are retiring, which actually in turn leads to a savings in salary expenses. Line 261 is certified workers' comp. There's a savings there of $160,000. You'll also see a savings in classified workers' comp, not as significant, it doesn't show up there, but there's additional savings there as well. When we became self-insured for workers' compensation, we're required to create a workers' compensation self-insurance fund. We transfer money each year from the general fund to that fund, whereas in the past we would have been making an expenditure for workers' comp. Now that money is being transferred to another fund. We set a reserve balance based on the stop-loss insurance. We will hit that amount in fiscal year 13 to where we're going to be able to decrease the amount that we're moving in fiscal year 14 and most likely beyond if we maintain stable claims.
And that's kind of consistent with the safety presentation that we had heard from
Jen Eisman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because we're self-insured, I don't think we'll be participating in any cost savings that the governor announced last
correct.
Thursday.
Correct.
That's
Because
correct.
that's only for those who are not self-insured.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're still ahead of the game, because it's still the
That's
better
1
deal
year.
for us.
We've had a lot of years of savings.
Yeah. Object 441, telephone services, there's an increase of $275,000. That is due to, we've been noticing problems the last couple of years as there's an increase in the number of devices, computer devices in the district, as well as the number of users. It's creating an issue with bandwidth and functions freezing up. So this is the increase is to increase the number of fiber connections.
Are you lumping that in with, I didn't hear you, with the electricity costs?
No, they're broken
that's
out
a separate one that's on the next slide.
Okay.
But they are both in purchase services. So they are both in the 400 object, but in more detail, the fiber is in 441, the electricity is in 451.
Do we, you mean to wait until you get to electricity?
I'm here now, go ahead.
Okay, where do we see the savings with that energy company? They're supposed to write us checks if they don't lower
There's no savings
Well,
projected.
just for
We're not
clarity,
using that company.
we never engaged that firm to do anything.
Right.
So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to make sure we know that. The development committee is going through a process of determining how to monitor savings.
But they decided, because we attend the development committee meetings, the committee, with the input of the committee members, decided not to go with that type of company and to do it in-house because the savings was, would be greater.
Which I believe at the last meeting, maybe not that one, the one prior, we authorized the purchase of some software.
Exactly.
To begin the usage tracking and the database.
And they've started, I was at the meeting last Wednesday, and they've started to input the information in there.
So we will use that consultancy at no cost to the district.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that's a good example of how this, we're not to the forecast yet, but how the forecast is a snapshot, because right now, to me, I don't have anything concrete enough to project savings for electricity from something like that.
Right.
Whereas maybe by the time we get the October forecast, we may have some, concrete projections that we could stick in there. Looking at electricity, we've seen a 19% increase in our electric rates. So you're going to see a $679,000 increase in electricity. That's a significant increase.
And maybe there's a question for Jeff a little bit, but for the electricity, do we purchase through MEC or through a purchasing consortium so we know we're getting good rates, or is there something that we could potentially hedge? I know we've hedged gas costs before. I'll hesitate when I say that, because if you start to hedge, by the time the rates take off, it's too late.
Right.
But I just want to make sure that, and I'm sure
Yes,
Jeff's
he
on
does.
it.
He does work with MEC on that whole piece.
Okay.
And in fact, we kind of pulled back a little bit on the hedging here recently.
On the gas side and electricity too.
Yeah. So, and he can give a full report on that once he returns.
Great.
And part of the electricity, at some level, you're tied to the company that each building happens to be within that area.
Yeah.
Software supplies, increase of $155,000. A couple pieces there as the number of users and the number of devices increase. Software licensing fees are going to increase. There's also been a couple of software that have been added. I think those were approved in a board meeting a couple months ago. So those are included in there. And finally, Object 520 textbooks, obviously a significant increase there, but that's an item that's been in the 5-year forecast. Projected it's our math textbook adoption.
And just as a reminder for the textbooks, we are on a scheduled plan of when you adopt those textbooks and buy them, so you just don't jump up one year and say, oh, we got to get textbooks. There's a plan.
Yeah, and just so I keep it, when we open a building, we purchase the textbooks through capital, and when we, I guess, retool an academic area, it goes through operations. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that is all for the budget portion. Are there any questions on the budget side before we go to the forecast?
No? Good job.
Okay, so moving on to the May 2013 forecast update. As Julie talked about earlier, by law, we are required to do a forecast in October and to update that forecast in May. Most significantly, what we do, we go in and now that we're most of the way through the year, we're able to put in close to actual numbers for fiscal year 13. Also able to update fiscal year 14 based on the budget that we're just talked about and make just other changes that we know are coming down the pike. Looking at the fiscal year 13 projections in the first reading of the May forecast, comparing that back to the October 2012 forecast. Revenue increased in total in fiscal year 13 by $2.1 million, or 1.28%. On the real estate tax line, there was an increase of $580,000. A few different pieces involved there. We did see a slight spike in new construction, which that's an increased revenue, and that's revenue that flows through the forecast. One variable there is deciding whether that's an increase that will continue to rise, or if it's a one-time spike, which we still get the valuation, but that is something we'll have to keep monitoring closely, is if the trend of new construction will continue to rise or not. And one thing I always like to point out, just so you understand the magnitude of these projections on new construction and valuation, if we're off by 1/10 of 1%, that equates to about $100,000. So if new construction raises 1/10 of 1% or goes down 1/10 of 1% compared to the projections, that's a $100,000 variance. We had a slight spike in delinquency as well, but I think the most significant change, and I think I talked about this earlier, is the collection split. So while you're going to see a significant increase in revenue for fiscal year 13, when I get to the fiscal year 14 slide, you're actually going to see a decrease in revenue. And what we're saying there is that part of the revenue that we received this year is actually revenue we were projecting to receive in fiscal year 14. As the county auditor collects money on a tax year, calendar year basis, our projections are on a fiscal year basis. In the unrestricted grants and aid, that's our state basic aid, you're going to see an increase in that line, mostly due to casino tax revenue. If you remember, in October of 2012 forecast, we did not include casino revenue in our projections. We included it in our risk assessment. At that time, we felt it was possible and likely that the state would try to find a way to offset that revenue by taking it out of our state basic aid. That didn't turn out to be the case. We did receive $370,000 of casino revenue in January, and the two versions of the state budget that we've seen so far, it's not looking like they're going to take that away either as well. So we've put that in the forecast and projected it out. Also, you'll see an increase in homestead and rollback and other revenue based on valuations. I already mentioned the significant increase in TIF revenue. There was that one company paid a real big delinquency. That was a difference of $600,000 based on where we had projected delinquency to come in at. But there was also an increase based on valuation, so there is some of that increase will flow through the forecast. Flipping to the expenditure side for fiscal year 13, comparing to October 2012, expenditures decreased by $4 million, or 2.5%. Most significant lines are going to be personnel services and retirement and benefits. As a service-oriented organization, our most significant expenditures are in those lines. Personnel services came in $1.6 million less than the October forecast. Multiple items added up to that. We project each year educational advancement for certified staff. That number came in almost half of where we had projected it and half of where the historical trend had been. That's a savings of $350,000. New staffing came in $200,000 less than projected. And as I mentioned before, with the changes in the STRS retirement regulations led to the significant increase in retirements. The most significant savings there is that some of those retirees weren't replaced. That's a very significant savings. A smaller piece of that is we project new hires and replacement hires to come in at a certain level, and on average, if they come in less, then we've got savings there as well, which they did. On the retirement and benefits side, $1.25 million in savings. Any savings in personal services is going to lead to a savings in benefits, that's tied to that line. We saved $225,000 in STRS. But more significantly, we saved $1 million in our insurance compared to the October 2012 forecast. I'll hit that in more detail on a future slide. Purchase services, multiple lines there, just added up to savings of close to $400,000. Most significant of which are foundation deductions. That's deductions that we get taken out of our state basic aid for things like community school, different special ed deductions. Those are lines that we really don't have any control over. If you look back at historical trends, sometimes they've been way up, Then for the last year, they came way down in fiscal 13, and you'll notice in fiscal year 14, we've taken notice of that trend, and we've decreased our budget going forward. In other objects, the most significant expenditure in other objects is our ESC expenditures. That's staffing for preschools, special ed items such as speech therapists, occupational therapists, those types of things. One of the uncertainties in projecting other object expenditures and ESC expenditures in particular is that we never know how much available. Part of those expenditures are covered by federal funds, and we don't know for sure what level of federal funding is going to be from year to year, as well as how much is going to be available out of those federal funds to pay for the ESC, as there's other expenditures out of there as well. Even more so, that's going to be an impact on fiscal year 14, as sequestration is going to affect our federal funding level. That we're projecting a decrease in federal funding of I think 8.5%. Okay, fast forward to the fiscal year 14 projections, comparing our first reading of the May forecast to the October 12. Revenue in total increased by $1 million, or 0.6%. Real estate tax, we discussed there, that actually is a decrease of $380,000 based on that collection split that we talked about. Unrestricted grants and aid, I feel like we're beating a dead horse there, and I know you're going to talk about the state budget. What we've got in the forecast is assuming that it's flat, the state basic aid piece. Right now, we don't really know where it's going to be. We haven't seen anything that says it's going to decrease, which is good, but we haven't seen anything with much certainty to show that we're going to get a significant increase. So for now, we've got it in as flat.
So maybe, pause now, maybe you want to spend a couple minutes on that. So we did, actually, Todd, Dr. Lucas, and I spent had a better part of 45 minutes to an hour with Senator Jordan this morning, talking through how he thinks maybe things are going to navigate their way through the Senate. Obviously lobbying for kind of Olentangy's perspective on where, how could we work together with Senator Jordan on ensuring that the residents of Olentangy get the much needed tax relief that frankly they deserve. And I will say to date, I have found Senator Jordan the most understanding, the most willing to partner with us to perhaps put some amendments in place and to work with the district on really trying to drive some tax relief for the residents of Olentangy. I don't know if Todd or Dr. Lucas want to add anything to that.
Todd, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I feel like the meeting went well, and he was certainly open to what we discussed, and kind of the emphasis of what we discussed, and I know we've discussed it in meetings prior, is that the main point is that Olentangy is kind of in a league of our own because of our enrollment growth, and with that enrollment growth, it leads to basically a decrease in our state funding at a per pupil basis year after year. So we've been pushing to try to get some additional state funding to help with that student growth and tax relief.
Was there a scare in 2011? I'm just looking here for the state funding, where we changed our forecast back then and dropped it by like half.
Well, that was the new budget, and there were state budget cuts of the for that budget, because you do a 2-year budget. Is there a particular line item? Because tangible personal property tax got cut with that budget.
It was just on the unrestricted, that's why I was mentioning it now.
Oh,
with
yeah.
The state aid. So in 2011, we did a forecast, and we dropped 2012 by like half. And the rest of the years in the next year, it was right back where it was in the 2010 projection. We're pretty close to it.
That was the current dialogue at the time of what the future of the state aid was going to be. Yeah.
You could shoot me an email, Adam. I could look at the prior
But it's
forecast. I'm
been-
not sure off the top of my head.
It's been pretty consistent, unfortunately, of that 7. between 7.3 and 7.5 million dollars. What really killed us with the last budget was the accelerated phase out of the tangible personal property tax to the tune of $3 million, for 1 year, and I think over the course of the forecast was, in the double digit of millions of dollars. So that really impacted us, and we haven't even brought that up to our elected officials. Don't you remember what you did to us back with the prior budget?
I would also add, along with Kevin's comment about Senator Jordan, I think it was positive. I think it was promising. I think the next 2 weeks are critical. They're very critical for all of us, not only in this room, but in this entire county, because I think Senator Jordan was very receptive and somewhat surprised at the growth. We say a lot here, the decade fastest growing. I think those words just kind of roll out of our mouth and through our ears, but when you see the comparison over 5 years, for example, we've grown approximately 3,600 students. The next closest is 900 total. 900 in those 5 years. So that definitely makes us an outlier. And I think we've done a great job here providing high-quality education at an efficient cost. I do appreciate his attitude toward us, toward that whole concept. And of course, we're going to follow up. He's working now to get us in with someone from the Senate Education Committee, specifically Senator Hughes. We hope to meet with him very, very soon. And when you talk about tax relief, I think that's a winner for everybody in this room. I can't emphasize that enough. That's a winner for everyone in this room. And these next 2 weeks are critical. Now, tomorrow morning I go see Representative Brenner at 8 o'clock.
Who the elected officials, both the Republicans, the Democrats, the House and the Senate, who they're hearing from are the rural school districts.
Right.
And the three most vocal ones that have been testifying and parading themselves through this whole process: Morgan Local, Northern Local, and Fort Fry. I did some research. They spend more per pupil, and they get more in state aid, and they're there crying, "We need more money." And when I pulled up their cost per pupil, it just blew me away. You would have thought by listening to their testimony that they were getting pennies. And that just shocked me. But the elected officials are listening to them. It's that heartstrings issue, and they're up there testifying. So we need to get our voices heard. Dr. Lucas was there in the House. He's going back there hopefully next week to speak to the Senate Education Finance Subcommittee. They've been putting us off and putting us off and putting us off, but they were sure to invite these three school districts. They were invited to provide testimony, whereas we've had to push and push and push just to get him on the agenda, and it's not a for sure thing yet. I will believe it when I see it.
Well, I think there are 2 points that I'm a firm believer that the easiest thing to find are problems, hardest thing to find are solutions. And I can very much appreciate the work of legislators, but I think we also have to come to the table with solutions. And 2 things that we've really been pounding on. One would be elimination of caps, or at least expanding or increasing caps for those school districts that are increasing enrollment. And the other would be, from a fairness standpoint, funding us at the same rate that non-public and charter schools. And that's about $1,050. We get approximately $360 per student. We give them approximately $1,050 because we're very much for competition. As I told Senator Jordan today, you show me a charter school or a non-public school that does better than us close by, I'll be on the phone talking with them saying, what are you doing? Last year, I believe we got 275 kids back from non-public. So that pretty well sets the stage, and those are facts. And I think if we can get one of those or both of those things, this forecast is going to look a lot better. It looks good, it's going to look a lot better. I can't say enough about tax relief. I don't know anyone that's against tax relief.
The Senate expects to vote on their portion of the budget by June 5th. So right now it's in a subcommittee. Probably next week, the subcommittee will vote it out, and it'll go to the full Finance Committee. And then the Finance Committee will work on it. There'll be more testimony. Then you've got Memorial Day week in there, and they'll be back doing parades. And so the goal is for the full Senate to vote on their portion of the budget June 5th. They are not going to agree with the House. So then it goes to Conference Committee, and they pull members of the House, members of the Senate, and they go to a room, and they have to collaborate and compromise and come out with a budget by June 30th. And then the governor has veto power.
So,
We have line
so more to
items.
come,
Yes.
more to come on that issue.
Yes.
But I appreciate the time, and Todd and Dr. Lucas, obviously Julie, to putting in, following this issue, making sure that our voice is heard. As SFAC, the School Funding Action Committee, has also been very active, and that's very helpful for us as well. So, thank you for allowing us a little detour
Yep, no
there,
problem.
Todd, so you can continue.
One more point under the unrestricted grants and aid. As I mentioned, casino tax revenue, we do have that added to the forecast now. That is a per pupil revenue, and we're assuming $50 per pupil. Equates to about $900,000 per year, and that's obviously going to slowly increase as our enrollment goes up.
Yeah, I've been somewhat surprised with the volatility of the casino revenue. If you look at a month-to-month basis, 1 month it's up 20, April is down 18%, so got to be careful on
It's hard to budget for
how we
this one.
forecast
We're
that.
talking about gamblers.
But if you watch what the other ones that open sooner or open later,
Yeah.
they're big swings. I mean, the difference of 21 million down to 17 million.
And I believe that $50 per pupil, if I remember correctly, I think the original number that the Ohio Department of Taxation put out there may have been in the 80s.
Yes.
Where they were projecting it to be, so we've come down and tempered that projection based on the revenue that we've been seeing. Finally, on revenue, homestead and rollback, other revenue, there's going to be an increase in there flowing through from fiscal year 13 valuations. Jumping over to expenditures for fiscal year 14, comparing that to October 2012. In total, expenditures decreased $2.2 million, or 1.34%. Again, salaries and benefits are going to make up the majority of that. $1.1 million. $1.1 million in salary. That's due to enrollment, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. We did have a decrease in our projected elementary staffing, but then also the decrease that we saw in fiscal year 13, that's also going to carry through the forecast. And also we're going to see a decrease in insurance costs and benefit costs. And again, like I said, I'm going to talk a little more about those insurance costs in a future slide coming up. Purchase services, we talked about the electric rates and the fiber connections. That led to an increase of $1 million compared to the October 2012 forecast. You'll notice, based on those budgets, not counting the payroll and benefits, that purchase services is the only line that significantly is variance from the October 2012 forecast, and that one is over by $1 million.
What would you say would be in terms of like variance in the forecast, what do we need to keep it under so that the actual forecast is useful? Like the 2014 and 2010, we were off by 28 million. They got a little smaller the next year, 17 million.
What are you comparing?
I was comparing from like 2010 forecast to 11, 12.
It's probably state
now.
funding. That's the biggest variance, because Todd only knows what he knows today. And so throughout this forecast, there's going to be another budget process in here. So we don't know what the current budget that they're debating is going to bring us, and we don't know in 2 years what they're going to bring us. So that's a huge variance right
And I
there.
can tell you the two most significant things that they're not in the 2010 forecast. The May 2011 levy.
Yep.
So there's $20 million per year, as well as these insurance savings that I'm going to be talking about, which is another $20 to $30 million.
And the tangible personal property tax decrease.
Elementary 16 was probably still in the
Right, was still in the
14 in the 10 forecast. So
Yeah.
it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, frankly, that in 2010, when you were forecasting 4 years out, your likelihood of hitting that number is much lower than in 2013 when you're forecasting 2014. You've now got 3 more years of experience. You're much closer to the forecast period, so there's always this narrowing of the outcome and also increasing confidence in your ability to hit the numbers. So the fact that what we forecast for 14 4 years ago is different than what we're forecasting for 14
Today.
now shouldn't
Well,
surprise
yeah, I mean,
anybody.
I can get that part, but it's
Okay.
just, it was off, it's a $48 million swing.
Yeah,
But
but
Again,
$170 million
the levy's
The
going to make
levy's
up
huge.
20, 30 million of that. And I always suggest that when you're going to compare forecasts from now to 3, 4 years ago, instead of just looking at the numbers and saying, well, this is way off, we were obviously wrong. I mean, you need to look at the assumptions, because I don't mind being off in the numbers, but if I made an assumption and the number off of that assumption was wrong, then that's a mistake on my part. If the number's different from now to 3 years ago, that's not a mistake. That's because the assumptions have changed.
Well, okay, I mean, I can see the assumptions need to be looked at here too, but also the next year in 11, we were off by 21 million for 2014. But the expenditures are always consistently overstated, and the revenues are understated, with the exception of the one that you did this year for 2015 and 16. I'm just trying to see, because when you're looking at this and you're going, well, let's look at what our projected expenditures are, and if they're going to be, in 2010, if you're trying to figure out, should we have a levy the next year, and you think that the expenditure is going to be 194 million, in 14, and then it ends up being 28 million off to what we think it is now.
We're not making levy decisions now for what's going to happen 4 years from now. So, a $500,000 change right now compounds throughout the forecast. So those assumptions that change, I mean, like I said, I go back to, you just have to look at those assumptions, because at the time when we said, for instance, the educational advancement, we've got a historical trend of $700,000 per year. This year was $350,000.
Also, in 2010, we were still negotiating the teacher's contract.
right.
So
And
the
we-
assumptions in the forecast would have been prior to restructuring, prior to insurance, prior
There's
to
just too many
giving up a
factors.
step, prior to the 5.5 point.
Why the
So
forecast?
it was based upon the best available information at the time. So we can move on.
And the forecasts, although they are required by law, I always argue with the legislators. My forecast is in your hands,
Okay.
because I have no idea what you're going to do 2 years from now. And so for you to make me do a 5-year forecast when you can't even tell me what my revenue is going to be in 5 years,
In 6 months.
it's a moot point. Yeah.
Okay. Looking at some of the key expenditure drivers in the forecast, staffing obviously is one of our most significant drivers. One of the items that the Finance Committee always likes to focus on is that pupil-teacher ratio. You'll see that still is edging up, which means the higher that is, the lower the per-pupil cost for salaries. That's been a historical trend of slowly inching that up, and even small changes there leads to savings. One thing I've mentioned before, and I'll point out again, if you look at the number of buildings at the top, 23 all the way out, this and the October forecast is the first forecast in over 20 years that we don't have a new building coming in there. So again, there's another area where that's going to lead to significant savings.
And those were probably in
Yes.
the 10 and 11 forecasts.
Yes,
There was
they
actually
were.
an additional, maybe even been an additional middle school.
Not
at
a
that
middle
point.
range.
Yeah.
And potentially a high school.
Yeah, that's right.
So also, and we always have to say, the pupil teacher ratio, that is the ODE defined ratio,
Yes.
which includes non-teaching staff. So it's got librarians, intervention and specialists in there. So when you look around the buildings and there are 25 kids in a class, and you see this ratio of 16 to 1, it's because it's a broader definition. It's actually, it should be pupil to staff ratio, because it's a
Right.
broader definition of teacher.
Correct.
Versus what we put on the CIP,
Right.
which is a more narrowly defined number.
Yes.
Because we
The
can define
negotiated
that.
piece is 24 and 25 to 1.
But it's a very important ratio nonetheless. It's a-
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
This is all the leverage in your budget is in this ratio.
No doubt.
And of course, one of the big drivers behind the staffing is the enrollment, which we have there at the bottom. This next slide breaks it down a little more. What I really want to point out on the enrollment, obviously we're still growing, but if you look at that K through 5 line, if you're going to compare the May forecast to the October forecast, in October those lines were all, in K through 5, were continuing to increase. Where if you look from 2014 to 15, was an increase of 8 students in K through 5, and then from 15 and out, it's actually starting to decrease. What that's showing is the bubble of enrollment growth, supposedly based on these projections, enrollment projections, has gone through the elementary and is now in the middle and high school area, which one makes it a little easier to project because those are students that are already here. So that obviously is going to have a large effect on the staffing piece. Okay, here's the insurance expense slide I've been mentioning. What I wanted to point out here is just, this to me is one of the most important slides in this presentation, and what it does, it shows the impact of the insurance concessions from our last negotiations. The blue graph, or the blue bar there, shows where insurance expense was projected in the May 2012 forecast. Thing to point out about the May 12 forecast is that is prior to negotiations, prior to any insurance concessions. You move over to the next bar. The red bar is the October 2012 5-year forecast. That is after negotiations. So comparing in that 4-year total from after those negotiations and those insurance concessions, that's a savings of $19.7 million. Okay, so then we go further from that, taking that October 12 forecast to the current May 13 forecast. That's an additional $7.4 million in savings. So over those 4 years, that's a total of $27 million in savings. As I mentioned, that's well over the $11 million figure that was put out. The most significant piece, from May 12 to October 12, throughout that time, up through the May 13th, we've been projecting significant increases in insurance of about 25% for fiscal year 13 based on our claims utilization. Okay? After the negotiations, we were able to actually maintain the same rate for an additional 6 months, which led to millions of dollars in savings. And then from October to May, what we've got that additional decrease is because we were still expecting a large increase in January of 13, of 25%. But as part of the negotiation and those concessions, with a lower level insurance plan, the rates for those are lower. And that instead of having a 25% increase, it came in at about 2.7%. So this is a significant, just wanted to point out the significance of those insurance concessions to the overall impact on the forecast.
Todd, I have a question. Do your forecast numbers have the Affordable Care Act
Yeah.
ramifications
They
built
do,
in?
and that's going to impact beginning next year. We've got multiple pieces built in there. If you want me to go into detail, I will. Okay.
Could you please?
I will. Let me open up my notes just to refresh
Yeah.
my memory.
Page 9.
Because I'd like to get everyone to understand
Yes.
how this
So
is going to
the
impact
Affordable
us.
Care Act, which basically is to make insurance available for everyone, is by making insurance available for everyone means that The people that already have insurance are going to be paying more, is the kind of the short end of it. There's multiple fees. Some of the fees we're already paying. They're not as, some of those aren't as significant. Some of the more significant fees that are coming up, we have what's called the transitional reinsurance fee. That's a fee assessed per insured life on our plan of, I believe, $63 per life. That's going to equate to about over $300,000 in fiscal year 15. And that's, I believe that's going to be in effect for at least 3 years. That money is basically to help subsidize the insurance exchanges that are going to be out there for people to take advantage of. We have the cost sharing limits, a change in how those are calculated. Basically, a change in the law is now going to make it to where people are going to hit the out-of-pocket maximum sooner, which will affect how you monitor your usage if you've already hit your out-of-pocket max. They're projecting that could be anywhere from a 3 to 5% increase in our premiums. So we've got an additional close to $600,000 built in for that. Again, this is one of those items where I'm sure 2 years from now, if we look back, those numbers, they may not be what it ends up being, but that's the best information we have right now. And there's still changes coming in, still new fees coming in that we're learning as they implement this. And I can tell you, based on discussions with our insurance broker, I don't think the government knows where this is going to end up either.
Thank you.
That's $63 per life. Is that must be paid by the employer?
Yes. While the percentage, that's going to affect the employee and the employer, that cost sharing limit, but the $63 is the employer.
And that's just not for Olentangy.
Right.
It's for everyone who participates in an employer insurance plan.
Okay, so I know the line everybody likes to look at first on the forecast is that ending balance. So looking back to the October 12 forecast, the projected ending balance, looking out to fiscal year 15, we had a projected ending balance of $19 million, negative balances after that. Looking at fiscal year 15, the $19 million, we were starting to feel pretty confident that we were going to be able to stretch that levy to meet that 4-year levy directive. Fast forward to the May forecast, projected ending balance. The fiscal year 15 balance has jumped up to $32 million. I feel, I would say almost certainty that we've been able to make that levy stretch. And I say almost because you never know. That is still a couple years out there.
Confidence is high.
Yeah, confidence is high. And then looking another year out, fiscal year 16, there's a balance there of $16 million. I know that's going to bring up the question, can we make it stretch one more year? That's certainly something that we're going to be monitoring closely. We're going to continue to try to find efficiencies as we go, wherever we can. But the one thing I want to temper that with is, one, as we've already pointed out, a lot of things. That's several years out. A lot of things can change. I mean, things could change positively, but at the same time, things could take a turn negative as well. But the other thing I want to point out about that fiscal year 16 balance is the line I like to look at is line 6.01. That's comparing overall revenue versus expenditures. And you'll notice in fiscal year 15, expenditures start to exceed revenue, which means now we're eating into that ending balance. And in 16, that number continues. This brings up 2 points. One, depending on where that ending balance is that we try to stretch a levy to, affects how big the next levy ask is. If we really stretch it down to the last dollar, that levy ask is going to be significantly larger, as well as, if you look at trying to be financially responsible, having a couple months worth of expenditures, a couple months of revenue equal to a couple months worth of expenditures in your ending balance. By the time you get out to fiscal year 16, that's over $30 million to be able to meet 2 months worth of expenditures. But the other point that this shows, and a point that we've been talking about, is if you look at that revenue line, it's pretty flat. throughout. I mean, we get some minor increases based on new construction, casino revenue, those kinds of things. But, you know, without that additional state revenue that we're pushing for, obviously expenditures are going to end up exceeding.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can almost imagine this chart if the governor's proposal, you know, was passed, and if, you know, Brenner and the House Republicans got behind it, this would be a very different picture.
Much different.
But we're not holding our breath.
Right.
Monkeys.
Okay, finally, the risk assessment. I wanted to point out some of the most significant risk items in there that we list at the end of the notes. The state budget, I think we've covered that pretty well. You know, obviously there's a risk that the revenue will increase, which is, you know, when we say at a risk, it's a positive risk. The revenue could come in, which would significantly, if the governor's plan came through, that's going to significantly increase the ending balance, and it's going to be positive all the way out. Enrollment projections, you know, those enrollment projections drive the staffing. So far, we've shown the enrollment projections slightly hedging down, but those enrollment projections could change quickly. One big factor out there right now are the apartment complexes that are being discussed in different places within the district. If what they're projecting for the number of families moving in those apartment complexes and the number of kids, if that were to significantly change, those enrollment projections could, you know, go right back to where they were. And we've already covered that pretty well. The insurance expense, the Affordable Health Care Act. While we had significant savings in fiscal year 13 based on those rates, for fiscal year 14 and beyond, we've got an assumption of 12%. You know, that's an assumption that we could have some additional savings there. We could have some catastrophic claims that makes that jump way up. One of the issues that's going to have an impact on those insurance renewal rates is going to be our current HSA plan, the high deductible plan. We currently have about 185 employees on that plan. We'll be monitoring the enrollment in that plan closely as that adds additional savings compared to the PPO plan.
So is that about like 12%? Or we have like 1,100 employees, 180 people go over?
We have about 1,100 teachers.
I'm sorry.
So we have around 1,850 now employees.
So yeah, you're at about 10%.
10%. Yeah, so like I said, we'll monitor that closely, monitor any changes in that enrollment, as well as, you know, the most important thing with the high deductible plan is that educating our staff, because this is a new plan to them, even though it's been around a year, still educating them, helping them understand how it works, trying to increase enrollment in that plan. That's all I have. If there's any questions now.
I want to just point out again the job that the Finance and Audit Committee volunteers do. Great dialogue with those people, and I appreciate Todd. He's very willing to take those comments and bring it into these reports.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tom. Okay, next discussion item is the first reading of the board policy updates. Ms. Martin.
Good evening. I apologize for the number of emails you've received recently. There's not a lot of policies, but there are some important ones to take a look at, and I will walk through those tonight. The most recent policy draft that I sent you starts out with 0165.1, 0165.2, and those are the most recent ones, changes that Neola sent regarding regular meetings and special meetings. So just to point those out to you, that there is a slight change in both of those special meeting, regular meeting languages, and there, I wanted to make sure that everybody did receive that. That was a late addition that came to you. The next one, the next few, that is religion in the curriculum 2270. That's a revised policy, and If you notice in the bold language, it talks about the reference to policy 8800, and no board employee will promote religion in the classroom or in the district's curriculum. Keep in mind that that is not a required policy. That is just one that Neola puts out for us for our consideration. So we can take a look at that one. The next one is, however, required. It's the Interscholastic Athletics 2431. That references the House Bill 143 regarding concussions, which I'm sure you've heard about. The same third grade guarantee, we've talked about that before, 262302. That is a required policy. That references the legislation of Senate Bill 316 and House Bill 555.
On that one with the diagnostic assessments, page 9 of 15, the 2623.02, for the assessments, it doesn't look like we're giving the assessments to all the parents. It's only to the ones that have deficiencies.
That I'll have to check and talk with the curriculum department to see how that information is disseminated. Can I email that question back to everybody?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
It just looked like it was only being given to the ones with the children with deficiencies.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I thought starting in kindergarten that it started off pretty easy, or pretty early.
The assessment process.
The assessment process started off really early in this, even in the school year. That you
September
start-
30th.
Yeah,
Yes.
that you start assessing all children.
That's
That's
correct.
correct.
That's correct. Adam, what page was that again?
It's 9 of 50,
Thank
and
you.
it's the first paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
It's the second line where it crosses out, the district shall provide
Okay.
parents a copy of the test.
Okay. The next one is 312008, employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular. That policy just has a technical correction at the very end of it. You'll notice in bold, on page 2 of 2 at the very bottom, the Ohio Revised Code reference 3313.539 is the only change to that policy. There's no language change on that one. The next one is the one that I handed out to you tonight, reduction staff 3131. That's the one that has the comparable evaluation language that's new in statute. And I added the sentence for covered employees, such reductions, if you're going to do a RIF process in a district, obviously, if you have a negotiated agreement that outlines that process, you would normally follow that as well. So I did add that one sentence to the bottom of that policy 3131. The next one is 3220, standard-based teacher evaluation. This is, it appears to be a monster policy. I believe it's 15 pages in the draft, and Neola puts in quite a bit of language that's already addressed in statute and the decision framework as outlined by the statute in Ohio Department of Education. I've modified this language quite a bit because it is in statute. We are going to follow the process of it. And just as a heads up, I do anticipate this policy, which is the OTES reference policy, Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, probably to be coming back to you in the fall, to be honest with you. This has gone through lots of revisions, and this, if you notice the watermarks across that say working template to give you kind of that heads up that it is still work in progress, I guess is the best way to describe that one.
For the evaluations,
On 3220?
right, 3220, we should add in a space for at least a small percentage of parent feedback on teacher evaluation.
Any other comments on that one? Okay.
There's one more, sorry. On the 3220,
Same policy.
right, same policy.
Okay.
It says you can't use the teacher evaluations to promote or terminate. Let's see, or at least for the termination, unless the teacher fails it 3 times. I know we didn't make it up, that's the state, correct?
Yes. The language referenced in the policy
Right, yeah,
is...
with the revised code.
Yes.
So how do you guard against that? If you have to wait around for a teacher to fail a test 3 times in a row to use it, what other means do you have to evaluate a teacher for promotion, retention, and termination?
I would assume you'd still keep up the same process. You would continue, however, you would also have that employee on an improvement plan as well. So that would also be monitoring that piece in addition to the evaluation process.
And if they're on one-year contracts, you have that option not to renew the
Correct,
contract.
correct. Adam, do you have another question on that?
No, on the different policy.
Okay,
Or if their contract is up for renewal.
that's
You know,
correct.
if they're on a 3-year contract.
The next one is not a required policy. It is one that Neola has had lots of questions on, and so they submit that for boards to review. That's the safe operation of motorized utility vehicles by students, 551501. And that simply protects the use of using those vehicles, such as the gators on district property, and being covered by the district's liability insurance program. That's what that's in reference to. The next one is 6110, that's the grant funds. And you'll notice there's quite a bit of grant proposal language in that one that talks about, which is standard practice for grant monies that most often we follow. For example, title monies or federal grant monies, we have to follow those procedures which are outlined in that 6110 policy. The same with the purchase 6320. Both those 6,000 policies reference the Education Department General Administration regulations, which is EDGAR, EDGAR. That's those regulations that are referenced in both of those draft policies. And then the last policy is the travel payment.
On the
Oh, I'm sorry.
6320.
6320, mm-hmm.
It's page 42 of 50. It has, let's see, for situations where the board may elect to forego bidding for contracts in the following situations. It says, why wouldn't we do bidding for the educational materials used in teaching? It's at the bottom of the page. In accordance with statute, the board may elect to forego the
To
bidding.
forego.
Right.
But you could, because it says you may elect to forego. You don't have to.
Aren't we electing to forego when we put the X next to it?
Well,
No,
the
we
word-
would have to decide.
You'd have to decide if you want to or not, because the word may
Just
gives you the option.
Right, but if we vote on it, that's what it would be. If it's like this when we have the next meeting and nothing has changed.
So it means we retain the right to not have it
Whether
bid
we
if
want to or
we so
not.
vote that way.
And my sense was it would put the district in a position that if we found a set of curriculum, similar to how we do software, we find a set of software or a basic curriculum that isn't offered through any other distributor, or any other, and you had to bid it, you wouldn't meet the bid requirement because you need 2 bids.
Right.
And so by including this in the policy language, it protects you or gives you the opportunity, should it arise, to go with the sole source bidder.
I'm not arguing that part there. I'm just saying that when we have the next to it, it just gives us the option to forego bidding, right?
And I'm trying to give you an example when we may
Yes.
Yeah,
exercise
no.
that option.
And then the other one that is right beneath it, to forego bidding, the revised code, chapter 125. What's that? We can elect to forego bidding in contracts.
Oh, to participate in
That's a
purchase
MEC, right?
contracts.
Yeah.
Like MEC,
Right. So that's the
like our electric
consortium.
or gas consortium, or we have busing consortium.
Yeah.
Revised code, chapter 125.
I think that's the statutory reference that gives you that authority to do
Because if it's
that.
under administrative services, it's by the purchasing group
Right.
within administrative services.
Isn't that the 125 competition owned by?
Can I do the last one, then you can ask questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
The very last one is just one page, travel payment reimbursement. That reflects the IRS publications 463. That's the not to exceed the federal IRS prescribed mileage rate. That's that standard language, which is what I believe we practice currently in the district. Is that right, Todd? Okay, any questions?
Yeah, back on the forego of the bidding,
The 6320.
right, on 42 of 50.
Okay.
I don't know if it's the entire 125 or it's just a piece of it. It was setting aside purchases selected for competition only by minority business enterprises. Is that the entire chapter 125 or is that one piece of
That
it?
one I can't tell you, but I can contact legal counsel and get a definition on that if you would like.
Also, 125 maybe MWBE requirements,
What?
minority women business enterprise.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is that the entire 125? Because in here, it says, I didn't know if this applied, but if we choose it, what is it? For purchasing, let's see, if we choose to do that, 15% of the estimated total value of the purchases made in the current year have to be set aside for minority business enterprise.
If you choose to do it.
Doesn't mean we will.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Would
the
lock you into 15%, correct, if you choose to do it, of all your purchases.
If you choose to
If
do
you
it.
choose.
That's,
We don't have to choose.
Municipalities do that all the time. They can decide that they're going to have those kinds of involvement.
right, we gave ourselves the option. Correct? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Acceptance. Anything
we're done.
else?
And these were reviewed by the policy committee?
They were. The 3220 standard-based teacher evaluation, just as an FYI, has to be reviewed by a teacher committee each year. So that also has to be put in front of teachers for their input. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. The last work session agenda item is the update on the legal counsel interviews. So again, as a reminder to the group, our current practice is we have a host of legal firms that we use for various purposes. And the process we went through was to resolicit bids and RFIs for those services, interviewed those firms, and now we, based upon at least what I heard, based upon the feedback at work session, there was a strong belief just to kind of do nothing and continue the same practice, but I'd leave it open to the group for any discussion or dialogue on
And
it.
that same practice is to use
Okay.
multiple firms.
Use multiple firms and use a specialist at each firm depending on the topic, whether it's special ed, litigation,
Land purchase.
land purchase,
Construction law.
etc.
And I don't know that I would classify it as a bid.
Fair enough, thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Request for proposal.
Kind of one RFI-ish, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
and it's really about, we asked for their expectation of fees, but it was really about the qualifications they brought to certain areas.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we were looking for one firm that could do everything, and hey, all we gotta do is call Charlie or Susie.
Yeah.
But rather, as our policy's been, and what I thought came out of it in a positive way was a couple of firms came into it that we think we can rely on for certain expertise.
Sure.
That we weren't tapping into before.
Correct.
Yeah. We weren't setting a number or an expectation,
Correct.
getting an amount that we were going to pay. It's
We
all on
broadened
with
our
use.
consultancies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, so
No, it's good.
we should consider that matter closed.
And it's something we should be doing every 3 years or...
It is, it's a good
Yes.
process to go
Have we
through.
communicated that to the firms themselves as well? Will there be any sort of, that we're still using them and that we're not hiring one firm and
Right.
have we or are we going to?
I don't know if we have officially sent a letter out, but, in conversation.
Thank you
it's-
for the process.
Yeah, we have sent out a thank you note for bringing forth the proposal, but we've not actually said, okay, this is where the board is sitting.
They can watch
Because
the
it's pretty
tape.
well, for lack of a
Watch
better
the
term, business as usual. It gives us tremendous flexibility.
Yeah.
And, tap into the expertise of different firms for specific items.
Yeah.
So, so before we adjourn, a couple housekeeping items. Busy week ahead. Okay. We've got 3 senior nights.
Yay!
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you need information, Terry Nihao has the dates, times, etc. I would encourage everyone to attend. They're really good experiences.
And the public to attend.
And the public to
Yes.
attend as well, whether or not you have seniors.
Kids or not, yeah.
It's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah.
to see the slides go up, to know the schools, the quality they're going to, and the number of scholarships.
Yeah,
that
the
people come and
amount.
give. I mean, it's a fun time. I'm going to end up missing one of them because there's a senior concert for Liberty, and I have a senior, so we have a double up there. But I would encourage everybody to get out there and support this, see what we turned out
The
in
end
the last
product.
12 years.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, we're layering in 2 additional board meetings. So one on the 15th, which is Wednesday, and one on the 16th, which is Thursday. The 15th starts at 3:30, the 16th starts at 3 o'clock, and those are for treasurer interviews. So we'll convene the meeting and we will immediately go into an executive session. That will be the only matter covered at those special meetings. We have heard from 4 of the board members. Adam, will you be attending the 15th and 16th?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So that's a yes?
Yes.
Okay. So we will have full board attendance on the 15th and 16th for treasurer interviews. And June 1st, graduations. It's also right around the corner.
First or second?
Second, I believe.
No, it's the first.
It's the first.
Do not be messing me up. It's Saturday the 1st.
Yeah.
It's a Saturday,
I
not
was just checking.
So you can
10?
go to the golf
No,
on
that's,
Sunday.
oh, yeah. no,
Yeah.
10, 2, and 6 are the 3 graduations. And again, encourage everyone to attend.
10 o'clock Solon, Tangi,
I'll
2
change it.
o'clock's Liberty,
6 o'clock is Orange.
Yeah.
Yes,
Come and
it is-
spend the
It is
day.
Saturday, June 1st.
Well,
second.
come over there. I heard something.
Okay.
I just printed a whole bunch of invitations.
I didn't have anything else,
No, that's good.
so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Johnson, please call the roll.
Ms. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Ms. Feasel?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.